The 2x72 grinder has a new home. It's now in the metal shop, up against the wall with the grinders, the other sanders, and the band saws. First thing you want to do is make sure that the stop button is pressed. Give it a twist to release it, but you want to be sure it's pressed down. You want to turn the speed knob all the way down and then turn it back up about half a turn. This is the plug, and it goes into this 220 outlet on the wall. This is what powers the variable speed drive. At this point, the grinder is ready to go. If you twist and release the stop button, the grinder should begin to move. You can then use the speed knob to adjust the speed. That's full blast. You can use any speed in between. Probably something about right in here is a good speed to use. Stop the grinder, press the stop switch. When you're done grinding for the day, you want to remember to unplug the unit from the wall. That stops the VFD from running. Be careful about coming in contact with those two sideways prongs, or actually any of the prongs on the plug. The capacitors in the VFD will still have some power left in them, and if you touch those prongs, it will discharge through you. It won't hurt you, but it will give you a surprise little shock.
Hey, there's a new tool available at Purcellville. It's a 2x72 belt grinder, sometimes known as a lineature, although all I can find is references to the word lineature. I haven't been able to find a definition. And the reason it's called a 2x72 grinder is because it uses a sanding belt or grinding belt that is 2 inches wide and 72 inches long. Hopefully in this video I'm going to give you enough information so that you'll know how to safely and effectively use it for various projects you might have. First thing you're going to want to do is grab it from its storage spot back behind the EBF router and drag it out into a more usable position. Basic parts of the grinder consist of a motor, 2 horsepower, so there's lots of power here for grinding, a tension and tracking mechanism, and some platen pieces that will fit into the front. There's a control box, green for go, red for stop, and a knob that controls the speed of the device. It's a 10-turn potentiometer, so it takes 10 turns to go from one extreme to the other. There's some thumb screws on the device that are used to hold the various tool attachments and keep them from sliding in and out. There's also a bucket on the front of the machine. You put a little water in that and it's used to catch all the grindings and shavings. You'll find by using this that an awful lot of the stuff that would normally get scattered around the shop is caught in the water and can easily be dumped. There's 2 buckets, one fits inside the other, and you only need like 2 or 3 inches of water in this bucket in order for it to work just great. The various platens and grinding attachments are contained in the drawers, and depending on what you're trying to do, you'll select the one that you need. We're going to start off with the most basic platen, which is just a flat platen. It's used to grind on this surface, and I'll show you how to install it. The platen installs this way into the tube on the outside, same tube that's aligned with the motor. You push it back so that we'll adjust it as necessary later once we get the belt attached. Once you've got it at least into this receiver tube, tighten down the thumb screws just to hold it in place. Now you can use the device like this, be perfectly fine, but you may want a table to help support the work that you're grinding. In that case, you'll need to get the table out of the lower drawer. It slides into the second tube. And then this is the table proper that goes into the vertical tube. It is held and tightened in place with this thumb screw. There's 2 thumb screws on the side of the machine to help hold the table extension in place. Let's get some water for our slack bucket. I've got a couple of inches of water in the slack bucket, You'll be amazed how much stuff this catches, and it sure does help keep the shop a lot cleaner. And it makes your cleanup a lot easier as well. Let's take a closer look at the tracking mechanism. Tracking mechanism has a handle that can move the tracking wheel up and down. It also has a tracking adjustment knob on it that can be used to adjust where the belt tracks left and right on the tracking wheel. And the way it works is the front side of the knob, if you move it that way, the belt will move that way. If you move it this way, the belt will move this way. So this is actually clockwise and counterclockwise looking at it from above. But it's easy to try and remember that the front of the tuning wheel moves the belt that way or that way depending upon which way you move it. Let's put a sanding or grinding belt on this puppy. There may be a couple of belts with the machine, but you never know what sort of condition they're going to be in. If you really want to know what's going on with your belt, you're probably going to want to bring your own belts. I'll include a list of inexpensive, good quality belts and where you can get them. The belts are typically going to be in the top drawer or hanging on the machine somewhere. And this is a 2x72 inch belt, 2 inches wide, 6 feet long. And there's a joint on the belt where the two ends are connected together. Ordinarily on the belt, there's going to be an arrow on the back that shows you the rotation direction. The belt's going to rotate this way on the machine, and you want to be sure that the arrow shows the same direction as the belt is going to rotate. To mount the belt on this particular Platen, we're going to put it over the front first. Then we're going to put it around the motor drive wheel and push the knob forward and hook the belt over the tracking wheel. Then we're going to release the knob that's going to tension the belt. Then you can give the belt a couple of pushes by hand just to make sure that it's running pretty close to the middle of the wheel. If it's way off, you'll need to adjust, but generally it's going to come up pretty well. Belts are available in different grits or levels of coarseness, and the smaller the number, the more coarse the grit is. You can think of grit as the number of particles that line up to make an inch. So if you've got 36 grit belt, that means that if you lined up 36 of these particles, they would line up and measure 1 inch. A 24 grit belt, 24 of the particles would line up and make 1 inch. A 400 grit belt, you'd need 400 of the particles to line up in order to make 1 inch. So the bigger the number, the finer the sanding grit. Belts are available from about 24 grit up to about 5 or 10,000, just depending upon where you source the belts. For general grinding purposes, you're going to want a pretty coarse grit, something like a 36, a 24, a 100, an 80, maybe a 120. Once you start to get above 120 or so, the paper is going to get fairly smooth and fairly fine, and you're going to get much smoother sanding out of it. So probably between 200, 400, 120, up to about 600, you're going to be using progressively finer and finer sanding papers with smaller and smaller grit particles, and those particles will make a smoother and smoother finish on whatever you're working on. A quick word about the grit composition on a belt. A lot of the belts, especially the more inexpensive ones, are going to use aluminum oxide, which is a very hard, very angular grinding material that does a really good job. Occasionally, though, you'll run across belts that are made with silicon carbide. Silicon carbide is very hard and very sharp and does an excellent grinding job. However, it is terrible for your lungs. You absolutely, positively do not want to breathe silicon carbide particles, which will be flying off the belt anytime that the machine is running. So if you're going to use silicon carbide belts, be absolutely sure you've got a good filter mask on. Of course, the machine needs power, so we're going to have to plug it in. The cord is down in the bottom. It's a 220 single-phase power source. Currently, the only source we have for a 220 outlet is in the wood shop down over by the EBF, back behind it where the old dust collector used to be. There's also a circuit breaker that needs to be turned on. And as soon as you turn the circuit breaker on, you'll hear the VFD, the variable frequency drive unit, down in the bottom of the cabinet start to run, or at least you'll hear the fan. I'm going to adjust the table up closer to the belt, close but not touching, and lock it down. You can also adjust the height with the thumb screw that's down at the bottom. Just adjust it for what you think is good for what you're going to be working on. This particular Platen, there's a roller at the top and a roller at the bottom, has a flat piece behind it, so you can really generate some pressure against the belt when you really want to take off some material. This Platen piece, it can be removed if you want to use the front for slack belt grinding, but it's just as easy to slack belt grind up on the top of the machine where the belt is slack. Now, a flat Platen, of course, is going to give you a flat surface when you grind against it. If you grind against the slack belt part, you're liable to get a slightly dished surface because the belt is going to curve around the piece that you're grinding on. If a belt is going to break or fly off the machine, it's most likely to do it at startup or shutdown of the machine. In other words, when you start the machine running or stop the machine. Now, we've programmed an acceleration and deceleration curve into this particular machine. So as we said, if you're going to have a problem with a belt breakage, it's likely to happen at startup or shutdown of the machine. That's not to say that it can't happen at any other time. These belts can come apart. Usually they come apart at the joint where the two ends of the belt are connected together. That's because that part wears out, but the belt can also split vertically or just tear or come apart. You need to be careful around these things. This grit will take off steel at a prodigious rate, which means it'll take off skin and bone at a really prodigious rate. To get the machine going, we're going to turn the speed knob down and then turn it up just a little bit so the machine will start slowly. And when it's running slowly, we're going to check the tracking on the device to make sure that the belt is tracking in the middle. Push the green button to get it started. Now, as you can see, the tracking is running pretty close to the middle of the rollers, and that's good. I'm going to increase the speed just a little bit by turning on the knob. And I'll show you that if we move the tracking wheel to the left, the belt moves to the left. If we move the tracking wheel to the right, the belt moves off to the right. You want to adjust so that the belt is tracking right in the middle of your rollers. And that means the Platen rollers. Maybe a little bit different back here, maybe a little bit different on the drive wheel. But these are the rollers that you want it to track straight on. That looks pretty good. Let me note here that when you're starting the machine up, you don't want to be standing directly in front of this belt. Stand off to one side or the other, just in case it decides to let go. Now, once it loses its drive momentum from the 2-horsepower motor, it's not likely to do any additional grinding, but that belt flipping up with a coarse grit in it can really tear up skin. You're absolutely going to want safety glasses when you're using this machine. You're probably also going to want a pair of gloves because whatever you're grinding on is going to get hot. Now, not only is the slack bucket down below a great place to catch all the shavings that come off this, but it's also a great place to quench your piece. Just dip it down into the water, cool it off, and then you can continue grinding because it will get hot. I've got a piece of 1/4-inch plate here. Let's do a little bit of grinding and I'll show you what the machine can do. Just a little steam coming off it. But as you can see, that belt really takes off material. This is a 36 grit belt, and it's seen a lot of use, so it's pretty dull, but it really takes off the metal. Another thing you might notice is the belt wandering just a little bit side to side. None of these belts are perfect, and as they get hot, various parts of them expand and contract, so you may notice a slight wobble in the belt. You can see that this one's getting a little bit of a back and forth. That's okay. Don't have to worry about that. The machine can also be angled for some special purpose grinding using a 9/16 inch wrench. There's a bolt. Loosen the bolt. You can put the machine over at what angle you need. You can also adjust the table to fit whatever you might be grinding. Probably most of your grinding will be done in this direction. All you have to do is move it back to that spot against the stop, tighten the 9/16 bolt, and you're ready to go again. The machine's not just for metal either. At a slow speed, it'll take the sharp edge off a piece of wood really quickly and make a nice rounded surface. You can grind flat against the platen. You can also do some slack bell grinding up in this area. You can see how the slack bell grinding tends to hit the edges harder than the middle. If you want to get a nice flat surface, use the platen. Also, watch out for your fingers. This thing will take off steel. It'll definitely take off skin. You don't have to use the table. It's easily removable. Well, I said easy. Sometimes you got to pull on it a little bit to get it loose. You don't have to use the table, although I find it pretty convenient. You can use the machine without the table attached. For you knife makers out there, this might be real handy for getting the right angles or the right shape on a knife blade. And these machines are popularly used for making knives, although they have many other uses. Removing the belt to change belts is an easy process. Just push forward on the handle. Belt should come right off. Put a new belt on. Thread it over the rollers in the front. Drive wheel in the back. Push down the handle. Loop it over the tracking wheel. And give it a couple of spins to adjust your initial tracking. You do have to get it on the rollers if you want to do that. There we go. Much better. We do have some additional attachments for grinding. Let me show you how to get that guy in. First thing you want to do is remove the belt. Loosen the thumb screws and then pull out the platen. It can be a little sticky, but then again, you don't want it rattling around while you're trying to grind. The other attachment we have is for small wheels on the end. It goes in with the angle down, although that's not critical. Insert it and tighten it. Then you select the diameter wheel that you want to cut with. So we have several different choices. From small, I believe this is 1/2 inch, and I believe this is a 2 inch. So pick the wheel you're interested in, and it just snaps into the front. Then you're ready to put the belt on. Belt goes on the same way, back, or front to back, under the tracking wheel. Pull it through a little bit. And the tracking is going to change, for sure, on these little belts, on these little wheels. And you're ready to grind. Good for putting a tight radius inside the corner. So that's pretty much the story. When you're done using the machine, take the belt off, put the Platen pieces or the roller guides back into the drawers, coil up the cord and stick it down in the bottom. Empty out the slack bucket and push the machine back where you found it, and that's pretty much the entire story. I built this machine myself. It is the first prototype, if you will. It works really well, but probably could use some improvement. We may make additional versions as we go along. But as it sits now, it's pretty functional, and it will definitely move a lot of metal and give you some wonderful results. And I'll try and put some pictures of some initial results from a couple of pieces I did in as pictures at this point. So I'd encourage you to give it a shot. Keep your fingers away from the sanding belt. It will take off the skin. Oh, and as an aside, when I built this, I built a full set of additional pieces that can be used to weld up an additional lineature or additional 2x72 grinder. I'll give you a picture of the pieces. If you're interested in building one for your very own, you can use those pieces as a guide for what to make, and you can wind up with a machine that's just pretty close to this one, maybe not exact, but close enough to do good work for you. So have fun, enjoy yourself, and gee, grind something.
Just a quick note, when you turn the machine off and unplug it, the fan in the VFD is going to continue to run because there's some capacitors in the VFD that store up a charge. If while that fan is running, you happen to touch some of these contacts, it's going to give you a little shock. Nothing serious, just a little surprise. So wait for the fan to die down before you touch any of the end of the prongs, and just be careful with the power cord and everything will be cool.